This is
Podcast Raleigh
with your hosts,
Ashton and Hayes.
Craft beer, particularly independent craft beer, has really experienced a lot, incredible growth over the last 15 years in North Carolina. If our community is healthy, then we have a chance to build a healthy business in that community.
welcome into Podcast Raleigh. In this episode, we talk to Les Stewart, a builder, tinkerer, doer, and all-around good guy, and Chief Beverage Officer and co-owner of Trophy Brewing. Les tells us how he started making beer, what the growing and waning trends in the alcohol industry are, and if you give him enough time, he'll give you dissertations on how to make a proper tomato sandwich and the movie Steel Magnolias. Les Stewart likes doing stuff. He is a serial hobbyist who has built canoes from scratch and welded together derby cars, and you get the sense that if Woody and Chris from, at the time, Busy Bee Cafe, hadn't approached him about being the brewmaster at their new venture at a time when his hobby was brewing beer, he very well may have ended up in a different career. But as things worked out, they formed a perfect team at Trophy, and thousands of beers, tons of awards, and lots of giving back to the community later, they are still growing, with plans for their newest location in 5 Points just recently announced. We talked to Les about the journey, the new destination on Bickett Boulevard, how to quality check a beer, and a whole lot more, but we started by asking him how he ended up in Raleigh.
How did I get to Raleigh? I followed my wife to Raleigh, which was a very good decision, I think. Around 2005, she had a great job in the environmental kind of world down here, and I was finishing up grad school at Carolina, and she had a great house, and I started looking for a job here and moved in with her after we got married. So,
where was Raleigh a far jump for you? If you were at UNC grad school, you wasn't too far away. Where are you from originally?
Oh, Fremont, North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah. For those listeners that may not know, Fremont is halfway between Goldsboro and Wilson.
Okay. So is that 795 that runs between, or 895?
Yeah, no. 795. 795 came along far after.
That's what I'm saying. But
we like to refer to Route 117.
Okay, exactly. Just like whatever they're trying to call 64 now.
Yes.
But would I be right? Is that where Fremont is?
No, you are.
Okay,
no, and 795 was built as a new highway. It wasn't one that was renamed, but it ran alongside Highway 17, which otherwise connected Goldsboro to Wilson, and like had several of those small highway railroad towns along it.
Gotcha.
And then Wilmington, spent some time there in college, and then made my way to UNC, and then over to Raleigh.
Did you have impressions of Raleigh before you moved here, since you grew up not too far away?
I had impressions. But yeah, none like living here. Like living here is different. If I can even think back to what those perceptions
I didn't know if you came to Raleigh for the fair and back to school shopping, and that's it. Some people we used to go to Raleigh twice a year for this or whatever.
And really, you're right. That's the kind of impression that I had. No, I came. I mean, government was here. I picked up a master's in public administration, so there were a lot of jobs potentially here. There was a lot of nonprofits. I was doing website design work also at the time on the side that ended up being a different business in a previous career. And yeah, it just kind of made sense. It was a lovely place to move. Yeah, cool place to be.
I like that you picked up a master's, like very casually.
What? I'm sorry.
You said you picked up a master's.
That's master's.
Just like on the grocery store, I just picked it up.
Hey, it was. Yeah, you're right. I was lucky to get through that program, but Franklin Street was a lot of fun.
And so you were doing web design. You just mentioned. What was your first job in Raleigh when you moved here?
That's what it was. I was looking for a job in my field, and I had taken substitute teaching, those kind of things, just keep money in the pocket, and had started building web design and websites for folks and doing database development, which back then, if you could, read MySQL, and PHP and write a little bit, there was a huge open source community, so it was really easy to create solutions for people. So I kind of just slipped into that and it just ended up having a little business that did that for a few years.
And how did you find your way into beer making?
So that was kind of on the side in that time period.
Okay.
It was something that was really interesting to me. even before Pop the Cap, which was the 2006 legislation that really opened the doors to craft in North Carolina. There were really interesting beers that started to penetrate into our market. Sometimes we talk about our epiphany beer, meaning in the craft world, that beer that really signified something that was very different than our father's beer, something that kind of separated it from the pack. And mine was Victory's Golden Monkey, which was a 9% Belgian Golden, which was dangerous, but it just was so very different than the clear Golden Lager that I had been that's the only thing that ever been put in my glass.
Is known for.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so explore that opened up a door. Started exploring that world, whether it was Pete's Wicked Ales, and this is all kind of mid early 2000s, and really wanted to know, okay, this is really interesting and way different and way more diverse in terms of variety than I expected. Started taking it apart and figuring out, okay, how is it made? And ended up, I think I was in a poker game at the time in Raleigh, and somebody else at the table, well, we were just in casual conversation. They had made their own beer, and you tell me you're making something from scratch, and I'm interested in it, no matter whether it's paper airplanes or
boats or
watches or exactly
Canoes.
Canoes. Maybe we'll get to that. And the next weekend I found myself over at their house with a friend, learning how they made beer, what they made it from. Grabbed a couple of books, dove in, and before you knew it, I was doing 10-gallon batches of beer, the likes of which I had no chance of drinking all of it. We had big parties to kind of get through it, just so I could produce another batch, and had a good time doing it.
All right, and then I guess keep spinning the story forward from there. So you told us how you picked up the hobby. How did the hobby start to become more than a hobby?
Well, so I didn't really let myself dream so much as to become a brewery owner, or build one from the ground up. In that world, on blogs and things like that, you started to see stories about people doing just that, but that seemed really ambitious to me. What I had seen at that point in time was I'd been to other cities and seen bottle shops, little, what looked kind of odd to us at times because we didn't recognize them in the moment. But were these little convenience stores that were dedicated or overly dedicated to providing a huge variety of craft beer. And I was like, this is amazing. And we don't have anything like it in Raleigh. So a buddy of mine who was fairly, a traveling buddy, we kind of started working on a business model to put one of these things together. And I took a job at a local restaurant that had a tap list of like 60 beers. And I started, I curated that tap list for them. So I just kind of took another job doing that as a way to get into the industry and dig out some of those finer points, recognizing I would need that if I was going to open up a bottle shop and be successful.
And so just to clarify, you took that job knowing like this is going to move me a little bit closer to and learn the things that
That's right. Yeah, just to get to know the industry.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I started to meet the other people in the industry. And work on the business plan. And, business plans are kind of tough sometimes. It takes time trying to figure it out. We even looked at some locations and those types of things. And then I got word that there were not one, but two other bottle shops that were ahead of me in planning, Tasty Beverage and Bottle Revolution, which were our first two real bottle shops in Raleigh. And they were ahead of me. And I thought to myself, well, there's no way that Raleigh can support more than two bottle shops.
It's so weird to imagine a time where there were none in Raleigh, where it feels like there are more bottle shops than Starbucks coffees in downtown Raleigh.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is clearly, maybe I didn't have the business sense.
It's a different city also.
Anyway, I was like, okay. So I kind of threw my hands up, but I kept my job at the bar and really kind of enjoyed it and enjoyed, the people I'd met and hanging out with them. Two of the people that I'd met ran the Busy Bee Cafe, which in my opinion, and I think in many people's opinion at the time, was the best bottle shop, beer bar in Raleigh. And made friends with Chris and Woody, Chris Powers and Woody Lockwood. And we kind of became drinking buddies late night and those kinds of things. And after a while, they had gotten the bug to, take the next step towards owning a brewery, and they wanted to open one at another location. And one night, much to my surprise, they were telling me about it kind of for the first time and the details and stuff like that. And I kind of looked at them. I was like, well, who are you going to get to be the brewmaster? And then they looked at me and they said, we were hoping you would do it. So I told them they were crazy. And they were like, no, it's going to be real small. It's going to be just like, a few times bigger than your setup right now at home. And, you can do it. I went home, told my wife about it. It was probably about 2:00 in the morning when I got home because it was after hanging out. And she kind of sat up in bed and said, yeah, you've got to do that, which was a surprise to me. At that point in time, I was like, okay, well, at least I have to take it seriously. And that's how it became a hobby to a profession.
And was that just before the opening of Morgan?
That was several months
Okay.
before. So that was the other thing is I was very nervous about the idea that, opening a brewery isn't just, hey, writing a couple of recipes and pop,
Sure.
and start selling beer. We had to design and source and build a functioning brewery that would make sense going forward. Fortunately, we had about a year to be able to do that. So we worked closely through that summer to find a location, which ended up being Morgan Street, and then planned this small pizza place and brewery into this relatively small place. So it was the Burger Hut and the Bell Bondsman that was next to it that we ended up building the brewery into. So we knocked down the wall and we ultimately built a brewery that was 500 square feet.
Nano brewery, right?
And everything.
I remember that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we were producing 100 gallons at a time, which wasn't nearly enough to keep the taps filled in the end.
So 100 gallons feels like a lot. Obviously, it's 10 times more than you were making initially. How does that compare to what a brewery typically produces these days? Like, what's the reference point of that?
No, that's fair. I mean, sometimes we talk about breweries in terms of the size of the brew house, which in this case would be that 3-barrel, 100-gallon size. But that's not the best way to talk about the capacity of a brewery, because you can clearly run that system multiple times a day or multiple times a week or one time a week, and result in a much different size brewery. So compared to what we do now, I mean, we have a 20-barrel brew house that can produce 620 gallons at a time, but we can run it multiple times in a day, and we'll probably turn the brew house 5 to 7 times a week. For that smaller brewery, we kind of did the same thing, but we were turning, so we were producing what ended up being 400 or 500 barrels per year compared to the 5,000-ish barrels per year that we sit at in terms of production pace.
Okay,
right
so
now.
is barrels per year kind of the better metric to utilize?
That's right. All the metrics are important. It's just the one that kind of tells you how much.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Do you remember the first beer you made for Trophy?
Oh yeah.
Did it have a name or what? Like what was the first beer like?
It did. So it was by design a brown ale, because one of the things with brown is they're not highly hopped. They're not particularly delicate in terms of their fermentation the way that Pilsner is. So ultimately it was one that I had the best chance of not screwing up.
Right.
So yeah, we popped a brown ale into the recipe, and there were all kinds of things we had to learn, like how, the rate to run the water at to get the right amount of water into the mash tun compared to the grain, how fine to grind, to mill the grain to get it in there to achieve decent extraction. So there was all types of learning curve elements. But I'm proud to say that it was actually a drinkable beer from the start. That was Limbo Champ brown ale, which, it was a brown ale. So it was perfectly fine.
Are there any beers from those early days that are still on the menu?
I think the only one that really held is Milky Way, which was our salty chocolate caramel stout.
Yeah.
And that was an early one. We had that as part of the sampling thing and at the Busy Bee before we even opened and those kind of things. And it was kind of a challenge beer. Really wanted to build a dessert beer that was relatively low ABV but had a lot of body to it. And we're still brewing that these days in a seasonal fashion.
How long until I consider, I don't know about everybody else, but I consider Trophy Wife to be the
Flagship, maybe?
flagship beer. That from my perception. How long into the process did Trophy Wife come along?
So Trophy Wife was born, I think, in a version that relatively resembles what we know as Trophy Wife today. Was born in about 2015. So about 3 years into the process.
Gotcha.
And we were sort of hunting around looking for a beer that fit where we wanted a flagship concept to kind of be. Because prior to that, it was really just all one-offs. There was, a different list every time everybody came into the place. But we knew that we had to eventually migrate towards a flagship model so that we could, push into the market and those kinds of things.
When did the peanut butter beer idea originate?
Oh, that was actually at the very, very beginning.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a festival that happened in Boston every year, Extreme Beer Fest, put on by Beer Advocate, which is one of the primary magazines for our industry. And in Extreme Beer Fest, one of the things was you had to bring beer with extreme ingredients. So through the Busy Bee, Chris and Woody had lots of contacts, including the owners and publishers of this magazine. So they had reached out to them. They were like, how do we get on this list? And this list is like Dogfish Head and Magic Head and like a lot of the big guys that were doing really innovative things at the time. We're talking about 2012. And we wrote. He's like, "Oh, well, pitch the folks at Beer Advocate were like, pitch us a few ideas." So we kind of got together and started talking about some crazy ideas or what we thought were crazy ideas, and we pitched them. And we got an email back that said, these aren't crazy enough. So we went back to the drawing board. And I was like, okay, I've got this crazy idea. It was one night I think we were on the phone, and I was like, all right, it's going to be a peanut butter banana sandwich beer based on Elvis's favorite dish, and we're going to call it the King. And the idea is you introduce peanut butter in the boil. You run a warm fermentation with a Bavarian yeast that will produce these big banana-like esters. You have a bready background from the malt bill, relying on some biscuit malts and things like that. And so we pitched that idea, and they said, "Yep, come on up, bring that beer. It'll be a good time." And so that beer was invented for that festival, and then we of course served it at Morgan Street for a while.
Will it ever make a return?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because that beer's a mess. It's so if you run it through if you put anything into the boil, then it has to go through your heat exchanger to drop the temperature in order to get it to the fermenter before fermentation.
Okay.
And I didn't want to put. I don't like the idea of pushing peanut butter through these tiny channels that are in our heat exchanger, because it'll get gummed up and things like that, and potentially affect the flavor of other beers and those kind of things. So it's hard. We invented ways to kind of get around it, but none of which really worked as well as that.
All right, well, it'll live on as a memory.
It'll live on as a memory. We may find ways to get back to it at some point in time. But
okay.
That was
who comes up with the names for the beers?
Collective. It's often named by committee. We have a text thread. Sometimes the names are led by themes that the beers need to lean into.
And obviously there's a trophy theme to a lot of things.
That's right. That's right. So sometimes it's sports, sometimes it's sports adjacent, sometimes it's around a specific event or reason that we're working into the beer.
We're going to get to specialty beers in a second, but I was thinking more general. Like the very first one was Limbo Champ.
Limbo Champ.
And where did that name come from?
I mean, that's kind of a fun trophy, right? Oh, you know what? I think Jed Gant has been a podcast interview.
Yeah.
Jed Gant?
Oh, no, he hasn't. So,
really?
Sorry, I was thinking of somebody else.
Sorry, it strikes me that he might qualify at some point. But Jed brought in a trophy when we were collecting trophies, and this was a person on roller skates and it had Limbo champion, It might have been from Cook Street Carnival or something. And we were like, oh, that's a great name for a beer. So sometimes we just steal them straight off the trophies.
Gotcha.
So that was Limbo Champ.
Are you still using those trophies you collected? I mean, there was probably, I know I brought you 3 like crates of them.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't do a great job in inventorying them, so I can't say for certain, but I know that a couple of them are still on the taps at Maywood.
Yeah. It's wild to go in and see like, oh, that's my 1997 swim team trophy.
That was the best, right? Yeah, you could go
Find
into
yours.
Old Morgan Street and you could see all the old trophies that people had donated, which was fun.
Do you remember, does anybody take specific credit? If it was you, you'd probably say collective, so we won't get an honest answer.
Yeah.
Like the trophy theme in general and the name trophy. Does any one person get credit for that?
That was a daydream that Chris and Woody had prior to me even coming on board. That was part of a daydream to.
So they had an idea
Right.
to have that be the theme.
But it was born of the proximity to Mort's trophies downtown. Do you remember Mort's?
They were trying to use that space, right?
That was the idea.
story?
Is potentially I mean, it's so easy to have a daydream about putting a brewery somewhere. Well, it would have been perfect, right? It was right downtown. It had a loading dock. It had all kinds of really great things about it. In the end, there were more things that were against it than for it. But the idea, like they do, kind of grabbed on. And we, thought about the idea of using trophies as tap handles, using trophy concepts as beer names and things like that. And then, of course, we make Mort's Trophy Lager, which is an homage to Mort's downtown.
I can't remember what it was. Some trophy that was printed for me, but it was misprinted. So the person had returned it, but then they used it as a display one. So for a while it was like my name misspelled. Or no, I think something else on there was misspelled. And so every now and then people would see.
Was that Hayes Premier?
No, actually, now that I've figured out what it was something. It was supposed to say student body, but it said study body, and it was like clearly that was not an award. I was not getting an award for studying.
That's great.
Daydreaming about beer spaces. There's some news that came out recently about a giant new space in 5 Points. Tell us about that and what is going to be in that space.
So, I mean, honestly, this is new to us too. Okay. So I only have the fidelity of this information is only so much. But yeah, we are really excited about this piece of property that we were able to get into over on 5 Points, the backside of 5 Points on Bickett Avenue.
The hottest space in town.
I mean, yeah, exactly. We're really excited to be there with Aja, and it will take us quite some time to build it out and get the space to a workable place, because of course we'll be putting in a restaurant there, which we're really excited about. And it will be a little bit more elbow room than over on Morgan Street. We'll have some production elements there too to kind of assist us and allow us to kind of expand our capacity a bit. But yeah, we're really excited about that neighborhood and the amount of support that we've seen with even just the announcement that, hey, we'll eventually be there.
Yeah, that's great. So will production mostly stay at Maywood?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so there's some specialty production at Morgan, right? Is that still happening?
That's right, yeah.
And
so
then,
we carry two, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say what production sounds like might happen in 5 Points, but go ahead.
I'll get to that in a second. So it's kind of fun. We can actually carry 2 brewers permits right now.
Okay.
One at Maywood and one at Morgan Street.
Okay.
So it actually technically counts as 2 breweries.
Yep.
The Morgan Street location has big barrels. You've probably seen them in the windows, as you've gone by. Those are fooders. They hold, huge volumes of beer that we are souring or using Brettanomyces to produce really interesting flavors, elements that you don't necessarily want on the clean side of your brewery. So that's how we separate them out. So we produce the wort over at Maywood and then truck it over to Morgan Street and then pump it into those tanks. And then there's some packaging elements that are over on Morgan Street as well. While the activation of Bickett in terms of production is still a bit unclear in terms of exactly what types of equipment we're going to put over there. It could be something like a logistics assistance and those types of things.
Okay.
But it's just unclear yet.
Okay. And Maywood's got an event space now as well. So you've been adding on over there.
We have.
You've added some mobile trucks to the lineup. I mean, what else is going on in the trophy world? Is there space for anything else?
Almost no. It feels that way sometimes. But that, the Maywood Hall and Garden that we've now opened, that's an event space, has been a really nice addition for us. And it expands our options in terms of when people come to us looking for event space. We use upstairs at Young Hearts a lot for events. We'll, use parts of Morgan Street's location, the pizza place, for events. But this is kind of a whole different scale, and we're excited about that. Yeah, the horse trailer, recent addition. I built that over the winter. Found a horse trailer.
And listeners, he literally means he built it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was that something that was like actually being called for, or did you just like want a bit, like you were like, I kind of want something to tinker with? I'm joking.
A little bit of both. No,
I'm sure
you're not wrong.
called for, but
we had the idea in our heads, and we knew that it would be really useful. We've never had a truck that had like taps through the wall or anything like that. And we're always a little bit jealous of breweries that were able to come into an event and just kind of throw open their taps, and they didn't have to worry about the problems of jockey boxes and setting up all those types of things. So we wanted something to kind of solve that problem for us. So this was an option that we can easily drag over to Dick's Park for events happening over there. It's been great for the Sunflower event. It's been it'll be at GalaxyCon, which would be really fun to pull it into the convention center. So it certainly is one of those things that will have a lot of purpose. And we can use it on site as a secondary bar now that we've kind of stretched the kind of seating area and activated space at Maywood over as well.
So you've mentioned a couple of community events. You all do a ton of work in our community, for our community, around the community. How do you go about selecting the partners that you work with in the area?
It's probably more organic than, design.
Okay.
We have personal relationships with individuals in the nonprofit world through whether it's myself or my partners have personal relationships. Clearly, David Meeker is part of our partnership. And so we all have interest, whether it's social services in Raleigh, working on those issues, or whether it's the LGBT community through Run for Love, those types of things. We kind of have reason to see all of these elements and reason to support these groups that are working to improve our community. And that's just an investment in our community, because if our community is healthy, then we have a chance to build a healthy business in that community.
I was going to say, so when you do custom beers, so we just talked to Lauren Kennedy. She was talking about a beer for Theater Raleigh. I know there's a sunflower beer. I know you've done beer for the Courage. I see some beer that looks like it's for the World Cup. How do you choose the style of beer that's going to be appropriate, or is it all it's a partnership with that organization to determine it?
I mean, each relationship is unique. Sometimes the style isn't as important to the organization, and sometimes it is. The sunflower beer has some sunflower seeds in the mash. It doesn't really contribute that much because it's just not built like grain is. But they are there. We try to, be on theme, on point for in terms of deciding the style, but just kind of depends on the specific project.
Who proposes? Like, is there an application? Do you want us to do a specialty beer, or do you I hear you saying like you have your own passions. So like, do you go to somebody and be like, hey, I'd love to make a beer for this event? Who proposes a specialty beer?
Oh gosh, I mean, every way is different.
And like, I assume the World Cup, and now we're on video now, so we can, even though if you're listening audio only, you won't be able to see it, but we're here at the Earfluence Studios, our great partner. So now on video, you could actually see some of the World Cup beers that Les brought with him today. But how do people ever ask you, like, would you do a beer for me? Or is it more, do you go to people and say, oh, I want to do a beer for you?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we often have to say no more than we say yes.
I figured.
And that's the production schedule, and there's only so much tank space, and there's only so much time, or the time frame doesn't work. And sometimes we have to say no on that basis, even for projects that we would love to be a part of. There's just sometimes no way to get it to the finish line. And then other times people kind of fall in at the right time, and it's like, okay, this is going to work out. So it just kind of depends.
Gotcha.
Tank schedule is always wild, because we have tanks that are sized anywhere from 3 barrels to 60 barrel tanks.
Have you ever partnered with a podcast to do a beer? Just Just you haven't.
I don't think
you
so.
haven't yet.
I think that's
Okay.
not still open.
Oh, that's curious. Just curious.
Sure, we could find something fun to do.
Just wondering, yeah.
So how do beers go from, we talked about Trophy Wife being kind of a flagship. How do beers go from being an idea, a concept, to kind of a mainstay?
So that happened recently with Trophy Park.
Well, that's what made me think of it, was looking at that can. Again, forget people can't see it necessarily, but that became, I think, a mainstay beer.
Yeah.
What's that evolution like?
So, I mean, that was, I think we did that beer alongside the, Run for Love, and the very first one that we did, which is a 5K that we do from the Maywood location in June. And we built it out. It fit a West Coast IPA profile, which didn't really conflict with our other two IPAs in style. So it had all the kind of, and it had a lot of love for it. And there's a lot of good reason that one kind of promoted, whether it was the branding, the name, as well as the idea that the style kind of it fit nicely into our portfolio. So those things were the confluence that allowed it to get to a place where we're now trying to. It still will have a few gaps in terms of its availability, but we're really trying to get to a place where it's occupying the core positions. So yeah, it depends on a lot of things as to whether or not something can grow, just like, growing a garden.
Makes sense.
And this isn't brand new, but relatively new compared to, beers that you've been making forever. You guys got into the spirits business a couple years ago.
That's right.
Young Hearts Distilling, both the restaurant and the label for the distillery. What prompted you in that direction? And did you basically have to just go back to school and learn distilling, just like you had done brewing, 15 years prior or whatever? Why'd you get into it, and how'd you dive into distilling?
Well, we had a interesting opportunity during 2020. The downtown location as an indoor only restaurant, number one, we were shut down, by the state to begin with. And number two, even if we had opened back up, it was going to be difficult to make people feel comfortable and those kind of things. So we knew we had a minute to potentially revision that space and try something a little different in that space. And we took that opportunity, and we wanted it to have a strong kind of conceptual element to it. Well, my partners and I have always, appreciated distilling and liquor and bourbon and cocktails. And the cocktail program has always been something that has been part of our businesses. So the idea that we could potentially run a still in a distillery that could produce products of our own, ultimately to build a cocktail program around, and then potentially even push the spirits out into the market, was very attractive. So that's what led us to start considering putting a still in the front of that building. Ultimately, yes, we had to get a small still and run it.
In a perfectly legal capacity.
In a perfectly legal capacity prior to. So it took a lot of effort to kind of get up to speed on what we needed, in order to do the things that we wanted to do. I did a lot of reading, catching up. I did have the benefit of knowing, unlike where we started Trophy, where in the beginning I was, the brewmaster, the beer maker, the primary brewer. I knew that I just had to have enough knowledge to build the system and run a few products on it, and then we would be hiring a head distiller that had experience.
Gotcha.
So I was more focused on kind of the logistics and physical equipment than I was deep into the science of producing really great spirits. That was something that we brought on when we hired for knowledge, like we do these days, even in the brewery side.
Yeah.
So,
how did you go about naming Young Hearts?
We went through a lot of names, and ultimately, this was something that Chris Bowers put forward, and we thought that was a really great concept that sort of reflected at least what we'd like to think of our group of five owners. We have, even as we kind of, as the years pass us by, we'd like to think that we hold on to, the fun things, the things that keep us young. So.
And you started with gin in that space, right?
That's right, gin and vodka.
Okay.
And those are the easy, non-aged things to start with. We have a passion for Amari as well. These are explosive kind of area of of that market that is inspired by traditional Italian bitter liqueurs, and that's really a neat scene. Definitely a scene that's in New York and San Francisco and those types of places that we were trying to kind of lean into and inspired by those. So we've also done a lot of that as well. Though we do have some barrel aged stuff out now, which is nice in our barrel aged agave.
I got a question. There's a little bit of a callback to what we were talking about earlier, but I'm also going to roll it into another question. You guys got together. They said they want Chris and Woody were talking about opening another spot. You were telling us a story, and they said we need or you said who's going to be the brewer, and they said you, right? So obviously there was a plan in place to make beer and restaurants that are based on like self-made beer. Did you guys ever sit as part of your business plan and talk about community engagement? Or is that more something because of your personalities and because you're naturally engaged in the community that became an extension? Like, I'm just curious, was the plan, let's pick a good location, make the best pizza and beer we can, and obviously we're going to be nice and, hope the people will come? Or was there a part where you said, and we would like to try and engage with the community? Or was that almost a natural thing just because that's who you guys are?
Yeah, it was more like, let's just try to we thought making the best beer and pizza that we could was going to be job enough. And it was.
Right.
But yeah, then other than that, no, the short answer is no, it wasn't part of our business plan. I think retrospectively, yeah, it is part of our business plan. We realize that there's a great feedback loop to that. And now we've, it's not like we do it because, for what it's worth, but we do see its value, and it'd be foolish not to.
Well, it's a fine line. Like you said, you would see through somebody who, I always think about the sports world. You hear about the athletes who, everybody who makes a certain level of money has a foundation, but you know that certain athletes like show up for their things, but they don't give a crap about their foundation. It's just so that they can then market themselves as whatever. And then you got people who, they were good people, and then when they became professional athletes, they stayed good people, and so they, so it's funny. I think of it like that.
When you first got into distilling, did you find that there were more similarities or more differences with brewing?
The thing about distilling is it is really wide open. Like you can, number one, your vodka compared to a sweet liqueur or a vermouth, the difference between those two products is far more vast than the difference between any two styles of beer I can think of.
Okay.
Right. So in beer, you're making very different products, but the differences are nuanced inside the recipes and inside of the fermentation profiles. In distilling, the differences are hugely different in terms of the process. So you can kind of bring in products, blend, and send them right back out, or you can start from scratch, as we have in some cases, where we're fermenting fruit and then running it through the still and then blending it with other elements. So in the beginning, I thought they were going to be more similar because I thought that, half of distilling is just like brewing. But it's really turned out not to be the case. Like there is just so much more process available to you in terms of how you can approach a product on the distilling side. That said, yes, there are similarities. I mean, you have to start with fermentation, but even that fermentation uses a really kind of a different type of yeast, and you have different goals for that fermentation than you do in brewing. So even that part's a little even more different than I expected.
Do you find one to be easier or harder?
Easier or harder?
Or just hard in different ways, probably.
Yeah, hard in different ways. I would say hard in different ways.
Yeah, cool.
And if you were like in prison and somebody gave you like a potato at this point, could you like make alcohol out of it?
And the ability to scavenge a few other things, yes. Okay. The short answer is yes. And it's really a lot of fun because understanding fermentation and some of those the kind of organic chemistry that's associated with fermentation allows you the keys to understanding a lot of other things, whether it's pharmaceutical processes or these kind of things. So it's really been fun to be able to talk to people in other industries and then pick out the things that are really surprisingly in some cases similar in terms of what we have to do in our process and day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
And thinking about the future of the beverage industry as a whole, You've now done craft beer, done craft spirits. Where do you think the trend culturally is moving as it relates to beverages?
So there are definitely trends that are on the upswing and on the downswing. Craft beer, particularly independent craft beer, has really experienced a lot, incredible growth over the last 15 years in North Carolina. That is becoming a bit more tepid. It is flattening out a bit, creating certain challenges for us. While we've seen the up and downswing of seltzer, but there's a couple of trends right now that we should keep our eye on. One of those is ready to drink cocktails coming out of the distilling world. Even though our distribution system doesn't lead into having that exploding in North Carolina the same way it is in other states right now, that's something that we'll keep an eye on because that is affecting craft breweries in other states. And non-alcoholic beverages. Now, this is something big. We've seen two kind of new approaches to how non-alcoholic beer is made in our industry in the last couple of years, and that's really increased the quality of NA beers in particular that we've seen on the shelves. And that's actually a really exciting segment to kind of keep an eye on. I think you'll see people reach for a few more of those, and that's going to be an uptrend even across the next year, and I suspect for several years to come.
Will there be an NA from Trophy?
There may be. It's really tough. It requires some equipment and some processes that aren't necessarily pieces of equipment that we have in house. Or able to achieve consistent products with the equipment that we do have, those kind of things. We'll want to get it right before we can say that this is going to be part of our lineup.
So I'll keep thinking of clever names and sending them to you.
Absolutely. I love it. You're the best at it.
You can't just do it like how they make unsweet tea. To make unsweet tea, you just brew regular tea, but then you have to extract the sweetness. So same thing for a non-alcoholic beer. I imagine they just make regular beer, but then they just extract the alcohol at the end. Is that sort of the process?
The short answer is yes. It's one of the processes.
Do in wine, I know that.
Really?
Yeah.
So,
I was totally kidding.
No, you use these extremely. So it's easier with sugar because it's larger, so much larger than alcohol, right?
I was trying to make a joke about how the tea naturally comes sweetened, but
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take away from your joke.
No, it didn't land. It was
you mentioned it's larger. Do you mean like from a molecular level? Like
I do mean at a molecular level. Yeah, I was about to say you're making sweet tea the hard way, but it can be done that way.
No.
Or unsweet tea. Rather.
Yeah.
That is funny.
Thank you. Really, you're too nice, but I don't think it really mattered.
Sorry,
didn't feel as much when you say it 2 minutes later. That was funny. Yeah.
I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about the separation process for alcohol. So they actually use these membranes and pressure and temperature and can separate water and alcohol from the other elements in beer and then reconstitute those other elements with deaerated water, producing a non-alcoholic beer product that tastes like the beer. You then have a byproduct of alcohol and water that you could then use in other products. But the short answer is that's exactly how they do it. They use these crazy filters.
Now that I'm just thinking of crazy new processes, is AI chatbot invading? Beer? Have you asked AI chatbot to come up with recipes for you just to see what he's cooking on?
I did. It was okay.
You just want to know where he's at.
Right.
You're not
exactly.
going to use it. You just want to make sure that he's not like way smarter than you thought.
Yeah. No, it's and actually we have some breweries that have produced those beers, the AI beers. I know Night Shift has done one. I think Highwire has also done an AI beer. It's a thing. I am interested in what chatbot can do for us. In terms of the tool.
I'm trying to go down the deep road there. But I feel like it is affecting every industry. I'm sure it's even at least being talked about in the beer industry.
Well, and you talked about, so there's changes coming, and you talked about how the craft beer scene is maybe flattening out a little bit. How has that community changed, and what kind of challenges are you facing?
Yeah, pandemic wasn't particularly kind to us. Our model. Yeah, I know. So the thing about craft beer is so much of it was not just about the beer, but also about the social experience, the taproom experience, the ability to share and talk about and share our breweries and give brewery tours and be at the place where it's made and all of those kind of things. Well, for 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, we basically didn't have that. that really opened up the door for a lot of obfuscation between what is craft beer and what is not craft beer in terms of what was actually on the market, what was actually on the shelves. So I think people started picking up things that weren't craft beer and it became harder for the public to tell the difference. There became less interest in that. Seltzer expanded during that time. We couldn't continue to sell our story and explain why this beer is important and why, small batch production and community-based, beer making is important, smaller footprints and all those kinds of things. And so that's certainly one of the challenges that we have, trying to retell those stories, bring people back in. I'm not trying to blame anything else. It was also true that we experienced a lot of growth really fast, and maybe just comparatively, it feels like a slowing down. We're operating more like any other segment at this point in time.
And when you say we in that context, do you mean the craft beer industry as a whole?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the independent craft beer industry, yes.
And speaking of that industry, you talked about how much it's grown in North Carolina. I know you do work with the North Carolina Brewers Guild.
That's right.
What exactly do they do?
So the North Carolina Brewers Guild is a 15-year-old trade organization that supports independent craft beer in North Carolina. And we have more than 400 members statewide. And we work for legislative issues, internal education issues, all types of things. Sorry, what was the question?
I just wanted some background on what the Brewers Guild did.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe some important legislative.
Well, I was going to
work
say, specifically, you mentioned the cocktails in a can.
Sure.
Would that be the type of thing where the Brewers Guild would say, hey, it would really help us if we could sell these, not have to go through ABC stores, like
But potentially, if the brewers are making those.
Yeah.
If they're not making those and they don't want to compete for shelf space, then they may be against it.
Gotcha.
So there's sometimes that there are competing interests even inside our own membership that we have to kind of digest, figure out, and then design a legislative strategy, and then go out and execute it by way of using our lobbyist or whatever, which relative to the bigger, lobbying groups out there,
sure.
That can be challenging sometimes. On the other hand, we have a lot of kind of natural interest and it can endear us to representatives and lawmakers.
Yeah.
So got things working for us, things against us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was last year, a couple big wins, if I remember correctly, that allowed for more taproom spaces and things like that.
That's right. Yeah, and during the pandemic as well, we were able to lobby and stay open during a time when most bars were closed, and that was good. Couple of good wins. Last year we had a challenge we're getting through this year on permitting side. Some of it gets really technical, but there's a lot of modernization in our alcohol laws in North Carolina right now. So watching, whether it's the distillers, pushing for something and then evaluating whether this is good or bad for the brewery specific, and then trying to come to, okay, well, we see that you're going for this, we see why. Maybe you'll consider changing the bill in this way that'll make it more appealing to our group. Then we'll sign on. All those types of things. Constant negotiation.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It seems like you're always doing some craft. Like we joked earlier, I saw you built a canoe. And like, I know that building a canoe, I think some people think like, oh, you like bent two boards around together and like you were like floating in your creek. Like, no, like legitimately all the mathematics involved, all the measurements, And then at one point I saw you building a sailboat, and I thought it was like a real sailboat because you were taking pictures of it. And then I realized once it's on the water,
that's coming, right?
that it was just a model sailboat. Are you building a real size sailboat too?
Well, it'll be a runabout,
Okay.
so it'll be a full 14-foot boat at some point in time.
I guess my question for you
15.
is more: it feels like anything, much like brewing a long time ago, that was a hobby that you threw yourself hard into, then it became a job. Are there any? You've got lots of hobbies. I've seen you build
Taxidermy. Cars
for the Kirby Derby, yeah. Is there a hobby that you have your eye on that you have not even tried yet?
Upholstery.
Really?
Does that surprise you?
Yes.
No, nothing about you surprises
So
me.
is that different from furniture building?
Yeah.
Upholstery is like the covering of the
Yeah,
furniture?
furniture building actually because I've done plenty of woodworking. Like I kind of get furniture building. it's upholstery that's like, especially like vinyl upholstery.
Yeah.
I am amazed by what some folks can do on that. And if I can get that right, then I can finish the boats that I'll eventually build. That's the plan. This is all part of a thing. So that, and I want to learn electric motors better as well.
So for me, I compare a good beer to does it taste like Cloud Surfer? That's what a good beer is. For you professionally, or for people who are perhaps judging competitions, what does make a good beer?
Well, okay. So there's a lot of like technical qualifications for beer. And this is true in the history of beer. Like think about how precise and detail-oriented the kind of German stereotype is. Well, that is 100%, true for how they approach beer, right? And one of the things that happens in beer is you're looking for clarity in most traditional styles of beer.
It's a visual clarity.
Visual clarity, specifically in German styles of beer, for example, because it represents a successful effort to minimize proteins as they go through the process and then into the finished beer. So whether by proper boiling, meaning achieving the full and long boil for proper sterilization and hop utilization, through to the process of aging long enough to allow proteins to coagulate and fall out of beer, and through the lagering process perhaps, and then into the package to look at a crisp, clean beer that is visually crisp and clean and match that flavor that comes through it is one way to look at quality, right? Clearly, we have other styles that aren't meant to be clear. Beers that should have high protein, like wheat beers or New England style IPAs, those types of things. Those are built the way they are to hold on to hop oils and present in more the kind of more modern products that are product of kind of the hop programs of the Northwest that have generated really unique hops that have all kinds of flavors, ranging from passion fruit to you go through the piney and into watermelon and gooseberry and all those types of things. So it depends on the style that you're looking for as to which elements you should expect to see. There's some things that you don't want to see.
Consistent?
Consistency,
so much of it seems
yes.
like the taste of the individual drinking it. Like there's a judge on a panel and he just doesn't happen to like the flavor of passion fruit in his beer or something like that. I mean, is there a standard for each style of beer?
Absolutely. Okay. So if you're a judge and you're looking at a beer, you're doing that in the context of what style that beer has been filed in, and inside of that style, the style guidelines basically tell you exactly what flavors you should be looking for, what clarity you should be looking for, how much head retention you have or the ability to hold on to foam, the color range. We have a whole metric for identifying exactly what color range the beer should be in, the alcohol percentage. So you have to judge it inside of that. So if it meets all of those basic things, yes, then you go to the tangentials to evaluate the difference between beers that have no technical flaws.
Wow. Is there a certification process for that?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
Are you a judge?
I'm not. We have so this BJCP protocol for judges.
Acronym free.
Oh yeah.
Beer judge certification program.
Oh, hey, there you go.
And that was
so simple.
Yeah, exactly. And it was developed, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And you qualify, you go through a judging process, and you're judged as a judge and all those kind of things. We've got a good handful of BJCP judges in the community.
Favorite trophy beer, favorite non-trophy beer?
Whoa, that's actually really hard.
I know. It's like when you ask people, like, that's their field, like nobody wants to pick one. Favorites are dumb. So you do with it whatever you want.
All right,
if you have to give me a list, that's fine.
I'm going to just take core off the table. So our base beers, take Cloud Surfer, Wife, and Mort's and the like off the table. I'm going to look at some recent beers. I am really proud of this beer that we did called Slims. That we actually brewed originally to kind of celebrate Slims, the bar downtown. But it is a Helles lager that actually drinks lighter than a Helles lager, and it has this wonderful noble characteristic. Noble hops are kind of have these European sentiment about them that's kind of very specific. But it's a wonderful addition to this beer. It's crisp, it's clean, and I every time I get the opportunity to reach for it, I do. Non-trophy beer. I have so many non-trophy beer faves.
Give me one. If there's like a
Or
seasonal
how do you
one.
decide between them? You know, is it seasonal or is it?
There's one right
what your
now.
Well, I mean,
mood is?
the other thing is like I bounce around so much. Like I don't, there's too many beers to spend too much time on any one beer, and that's true of our trophy beers too. Really, I always enjoyed Whirlpool, which is a really approachable beer from Night Shift in Boston. I've some really classic, great beers on the sour side of things. Tres Fontaine, the Cantillon beers have a special place in my heart.
Where's that from?
Belgium.
Gotcha. I like naming beers that are nowhere near North Carolina. Like I'm not giving free advertising to anybody close by, baby.
Gotcha.
You got to go to
You didn't say
go to Belgium
You
and
didn't
Boston.
say North Carolina.
No, I didn't. I
Okay.
liked it. I just said non-trophy. No,
Gotcha.
no, I'm messing. Anything else?
No, thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, no, this has been fun.
Thank you for the time today and for lots and lots of great beer over the years past and the years moving forward, and all the other great products you guys do.
Credit to my team. So I've got
yeah,
a great brewing team.
I love everything you guys have done over at Trophy. Appreciate everything you've added to our community.
Absolutely.
It's been fun. It's a great community to be a part of.
Thanks for listening to Podcast Raleigh. Review us on your favorite podcast app. If you like this episode, share it with a friend.